What's up, guys? So today we're going to be talking about 6 different myths on the Jeep TJ, or kind of Jeeps in general. These are just my opinions on what I think about them, so we're just going to talk about them now. Alrighty, so for the first one is going to be Jeeps are really tippy. So with the earlier Jeeps, back in the 60s and 70s with the CJ Jeeps, the wheelbase used to be very short, the track used to be a little bit narrower, so you had a very short wheelbase. It was narrow, so therefore that's kind of where that tippiness, I guess, came from. But then even when they went onto the YJ, they increased the wheelbase, and then even farther with the TJ, increasing the wheelbase, as well as having coil spring suspension all the way around. It's definitely a lot more stable and not as tippy as people say they are. Now, if you're an idiot and you're driving super quickly on the freeway and you're really cranking on the wheel and doing evasive maneuvers, yeah, it's more tippy than, say, Toyota Camry would be, but they're not as tippy as people like to say that they are. So, another thing that is another myth would be that Jeeps are very unreliable. Now, I'm not exactly sure where this comes from. Maybe from people who have had Jeeps that have been not taken care of and kind of beat on and not maintained. Now, any vehicle that's beat on and isn't maintained is going to be, unreliable vehicle. That's going to need lots of repairs and things like that. But as far as reliability wise, the 4-liter that comes in the TJ is an extremely reliable engine if taken care of, oil changes, things like that. It's basically a bulletproof engine. You ask anyone with a Jeep Cherokee, Comanche, or even the TJs, if taken care of right, they last for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of miles. So for the third one, is I hear this a lot, is that soft tops are super loud. Now, this is partly true. It depends what soft top you have. So I have the original factory top from when this was brand new, and the factory tops are very thick material versus like an aftermarket top is going to be, depending on what aftermarket top you go with, is going to be a lot thinner. And now when a top is thinner, that's where you're going to run into your issues with it being loud, flapping in the wind, stuff like this. But I was out driving around even with the windows out or windows zipped down, and it's not loud at all. So like I said, it's going to be the thickness of your windows, the thickness of the top that's going to differentiate whether it's going to be loud or quiet. Another thing to take into consideration, if it's a bowless top, so if it doesn't have these metal bow supports in them, it's going to be louder even still. So if you have a proper setup where you have all the bow hardware on, a nice thick top and thick windows, it's going to be very, very minimal noise. Now, is it going to be louder than a hardtop? Yes, but I've had both. This Jeep actually came with a hardtop, so I've experienced both of them, and the soft top is maybe just slightly louder, but it's not to the extreme that people say, oh, you can't, talk to other people in the Jeep when you're riding around, and that's just not the case. So, generally speaking, if you have a good quality soft top, you're not going to be dealing with any weird noise issues. This one's a little bit of a controversial one, but what a lot of people say, at least on the forums and on YouTube and stuff, is that when you upgrade to bigger tires, that you 100% have to re-gear your Jeep. Now, this kind of has a couple different, I guess, perspectives that you can take. So it depends what you're using your Jeep for. Also depends where you live, what kind of terrain you're in, and then also depends on the engine and transmission you have on your Jeep. So for my instance, 35-inch tires, I have a Dana 44 heavy-duty rear axle and a 5-speed manual transmission with the 4-liter, and I have a gear ratio of 373. So a lot of people say you have to go to 488s or 513s to even run 35s. So for the street, which most of my time is spent on the street with this Jeep, 35s and 373s is plenty good. Like, there's no, oh, this thing's a dog, it's undrivable, nothing along those lines. Now, if, say, you lived in a super hilly area or you lived in the mountains or something like that, you might want to re-gear your Jeep if you're, constantly going up inclines and things like that, where you want that extra, you'll want the engine working a little bit less, and the gearing will help you there. Or like a lot of guys, are super big into off-road, you're gonna want is the best low-end torque, and the easiest way to move those big tires is by re-gearing to the proper gear size. So another thing, so that's with the manual. With an automatic, especially with the TJ with the 3-speed, you might want to re-gear. I don't have experience with the automatic and how that would react with 35s on the automatic. So that being said, I have 373s and it's totally fine. I could upgrade to 48s or 513s or something along those lines, and the Jeep, yes, would be, get up to speed a little bit quicker and be a little bit more peppy, I guess you could say, if you really need it. But the myth is that you cannot drive, on 35s. It's going to be slower than all get out, and that's just not the case if you have a manual with the 4-liter. Now, I can't really say for the other Jeeps with the 4 cylinders and automatics and things like that. Then you might, if you have a 4-cylinder, I probably would recommend re-gearing, just because you're not going to have the torque and the horsepower that the 4-liter has, and that re-gearing is just going to help you out a lot. But with that being said, definitely a myth that it's not 100% you have to. It depends what you use your Jeep for, and kind of the terrain, that you're driving. So that is number 4. Okay, number 5. Now this is just kind of a misconception for actually a lot of different Jeeps, is that you have to get rid of death wobble, which is, I guess if you guys don't know what death wobble is, it's basically when you're going like 40, 45 miles an hour, you hit a bump, basically the tires start freaking out, basically going back and forth all of themselves, and the steering is shaking like crazy. With that being said, a lot of people, what they think, all you have to do is upgrade your steering stabilizer, and that is not true. So death wobble is caused by, there's a couple schools of thought on it. Number one is your tires. They could not be properly balanced, and that could possibly cause it. Other things that could cause it: loose tie rods, bad ball joints, bad wheel bearings, front control arms. So there's pretty much there's a bunch of different things that can cause death wobble or be contributing to your death wobble. By just adding a steering stabilizer, you're just probably going to mask the actual problem. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you have death wobble, it's not your steering stabilizer. It's probably something else that's loose in your steering system. Another thing I forgot to mention, sometimes an alignment a bad alignment can also be a culprit of death wobble. So make sure your Jeep's properly aligned, all your steering components and suspension components are nice and tight, so then you can actually figure out why your Jeep actually has the death wobble in the first place. Another one that I have heard is that Jeeps, they drive very poorly. So they're all over the place when you're driving down the road. And I was lucky enough to find a Jeep TJ that was basically brand new. I found it with 9,000 miles, so I've had a good experience on basically what a brand new TJ drives like, with the stock tires and then with 35s on. So that's completely untrue. Jeeps you don't need to be constantly correcting when you're driving down the road. Those are probably going to be actual steering, like I was talking about with the death wobble. If your Jeep's all over the road, you probably have some loose steering components, a bad alignment, or a mix of kind of everything. But my Jeep drives perfectly straight down the road. I can let go of the steering wheel, it'll keep going straight. So that's just kind of another myth that has come. I've heard even people say that with the JK and stuff, and people say, oh, they fixed it with the JL. I don't know what they're talking about. Jeeps drive like any other SUV with solid axles is going to drive. So you're not all over the road. The only thing I will say is, if it is windy, that is the only time that the Jeep may be a little bit harder to keep, I guess, in a straight line. Is if it's super windy. Obviously it's basically just a box on wheels. So anyway, so that's just kind of my thoughts on that too, is if your Jeep is properly set up and the parts are fresh, you're going to drive straight. You're not going to be constantly correcting or anything like that. So anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Kind of maybe learned something new. Let me know down in the comments below if you guys have heard any other myths that you don't think are true. But anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please give the video a thumbs up. Definitely consider subscribing. That helps me out a bunch. And we'll see you guys in the next video.